It's Thursday, February 8th, and this is the 1909, the State News' weekly podcast featuring our reporters talking about the news. I'm your host, Alex Walters. This week, I'm joined by State News Student Affairs reporter Demonte Thomas to tell us about a dramatic shakeup in MSU student government. Then, administration reporter Theo Scheer will once again join the show to talk about his months-long passion project, exploring the history of the tunnels beneath MSU's campus. With that, let's start the show. All right. Joining the show, once again, Theo Scheer, administration reporter, the State News, one of the best Theos, I think, in collegiate journalism, and no nepotism allegations about this one.
Good one, Alex.
It's good. You got it. It's a niche reference, but the six people that got it, they loved it, I think. Probably.
No, you were probably getting messages afterwards saying, Alex, nice one.
Yeah. Anyway, well, Theo, you're here to talk about something fun today, which is rare. Normally you come on and we get to talk about stuff that's not super fun. So I was excited to bring you on. And before you get into it, I'll set the stage.
Right.
It's months ago. I believe it's October.
Yes, it is.
And for context, for those listening, this is, a football coach investigated for sexual harassment. We're hearing word of an upcoming attempt to oust the chair of the university's board. All these allegations of wrongdoing. This presidential search we're trying to crack into. We're doing a lot of very serious reporting. And you came to me and you said that you had this project. This big project that was going to be the best story of your career, the best thing you've done. And I was like, Theo, I can't even imagine this amazing, just investigative scoop that you're talking about. And you said, Alex, there's a network of tunnels beneath MSU's campus with a rich history of shenanigans. And I was like, I respect that you're a crazy person, And I was like, that's a nice pitch,
right.
Kind of whatever, And then for months, you would just say, oh, I found this, or I found that. I talked to this person. I found this old book, this thing in the archives. And you have put together this 6,000-some word story with this rich history of everything that has gone on in this network of tunnels beneath MSU's campus that most of us don't even know about. And there's this whole world below the university. It's an amazing story. Those of you who are like, oh, I'll listen to the podcast, read it. Read it too, and then listen to the podcast, or listen to the podcast and then read it. It's so well done. It's my favorite thing Theo's ever done. It's amazing. But you're here to talk all about it today. And first of all, before we get into all the details, I can't imagine most people on this campus think about this kind of thing. How did you even tunnels? How did the steam tunnels beneath campus? How did you hear about this? How did this come to you? Why did you think to even look into this?
Yeah, last semester I had a few late classes. It's getting darker out. And I was walking home one day and it was very dark, but I couldn't help but notice under my feet there was light. Mm-hmm. You look through these sewer grates, these circular grates, and there's these little tiny little holes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there's light shining through, and you can kind of see what's underneath. Yeah. And there are, just this sort of mess of concrete and pipes, and it was so intriguing. And I had heard that there are steam tunnels. Too. Yeah, there's
if you walk around MSU's campus, you'll feel those weird warm holes in the ground.
Exactly. Yeah. It's almost comforting. I think on winter days, it's just you get that little bit of heat. And I just started wondering, what's down there? How far does that go? Because it's all over campus, all of these little holes. And, I started looking at the university archives. They had about a sentence or two on their website just about, there are steam tunnels under the university. There are rumors about them, but they're not true. And I was curious. I wanted to look into it more, and I did.
That's just so great. That's one of my favorite things about you is that most people, including myself, walk around this campus and it's massive and there's thousands of students and there's all this weird stuff and we might observe something like that's kind of weird how there's all this light and heat coming out of these grates in the sidewalk and they might wonder what goes down there. But you're, a journalist at heart, and you looked for the archives and you found this thing, but even that wasn't enough and it sends you on this whole quest. So tell us, before we get into all your findings about the history of the tunnels and who all's been down there and what they've been doing down there, I think the question on everyone's mind, the first question on my mind when you first told me about this was can we get down? Can we get in there? Can we go down there?
Yeah, so, that's the question. Yeah. You're not supposed to. First of all, I should say it's against policy. It's an ordinance violation. You could go to prison. You could pay a fine, etc. It's up to MSU DPPS. So, can you? Can you physically access these
You've covered the should. You've said we shouldn't. But can we?
Right.
That's what I'm
can we?
At.
Yes. State News, myself, we found entrances across campus that are left wide open, overnight, over, weeks on end, that are just openable. all over. And
you, of course, for the story, have talked to plenty of people who've been down there and
yes,
hung out and had a good time. Like,
yeah, it's supported by this rich history of people kind of, going tunneling is what it's called.
Okay. So you totally can get down there.
Exactly, yes.
But maybe more on the should. What is, because you asked MSU about this. You said, like,
right.
Why shouldn't people go down there? And they told you.
Right. Well, there's, the pipes are very hot. Obviously they're steam tunnels. They transport steam to all the buildings. They heat all the buildings. So, you touch these pipes, you're going to be burned automatically. And it's dangerous. You could get lost, etc. It's dangerous is the whole idea. Yeah.
Yeah. And they say that another interesting thing that I love in your story is that MSU tells you that there are these motion sensors all over the tunnels. So if anybody, reads the state news, gets some bad idea to go down there, they're going to be instantly detected. And they're going to find you and they're going to lock you up. However, we did some FOIA work. And
I looked, I did some public records requests.
Yeah.
There haven't been any motion sensors bought for tunnel use in the past 24 years, and these things only last about 20 years. When they're in the face of humidity and heat, it's lower lifespans. Yeah, right, and they are steamy down there.
Yeah.
So it's, I'm a little skeptical about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to be clear, MSU says there are motion sensors and they'll get you if you go down there.
Right.
But
so don't try it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll move on. We won't do the whole podcast just kind of vaguely encouraging people to go into steam tunnels, which is not our intention.
It is not.
But okay. So before you tell me, you've talked some more modern examples, some small examples, but I think like the biggest story from these tunnels, maybe the reason people might already know about these tunnels is the story of Dallas Ebert, right? Which is sort of this big part of the MSU zeitgeist, and there's a lot of sort of rumor and myth and things that are true and aren't true about this. You, for this story, have put together what we believe is sort of a reputable retelling of that story and sort of the truth of it without some of these urban legends. Can you talk us through the case of Dallas, because it's such a fascinating story?
It is, and it gets misinterpreted a lot.
Yeah.
People say that he, there's a student in the 70s that went crazy in the tunnels and he, never got out, that he was part of a cult, etc. The truth is a lot more complicated.
Down there.
Right, exactly.
Like that.
Yeah, that sort of thing. What really happened, and this is according to, I talked to the investigator that actually ended up finding him. I read the book, multiple books actually.
You've got it with you.
I do. I
remember when you brought this in. You showed me, and if you'll show the camera the note in the book.
Right. So I got this from the MSU library. It says the tunnels are real on the inside cover. Somebody put this in there.
Reported, they are.
For those of you
they are real. Listening and not watching our new video version of the podcast, that is sort of not an engaging bit we just did. But you can imagine that he has this old kind of crusty book, and that there's like this creepy note. And anyway, go on about Dallas.
Right. So James Dallas Egbert III, he goes by Dallas. He enrolls in MSU in 1979. He's 15 years old. He's a child prodigy. Wow. And he's already taken to kind of being a little bit dangerous. He steals chemicals from university labs, and he makes his own narcotics to support his own, drug addiction. He does all these things, and including he goes in the tunnels and he plays this game Dungeons and Dragons. And this is, you're familiar with this game. It's supposed to be played on a tabletop. It's like a fantasy role-playing type of thing. But he joins these groups that take it a little bit further at the time, and they play it in these miles of tunnels.
In the tunnels under campus. Playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Exactly. They hide all these artifacts around it. Yeah. They coordinate different things. Eventually he's kicked out because they're worried about his age. He's so much younger and it's dangerous. And, he appears to be on drugs. He kicks out, but that doesn't stop him from going in the tunnels. And he goes in them, sometimes multiple times a day. And it's kind of a place of refuge for him. He's bullied. He has problems. He's confused over his sexuality. His facing pressure from his family in a number of different ways. And it's kind of a place of refuge for him. On one day, it's 1979, August, and he goes down there. He goes into this small little alcove in the tunnels. He lights a joint. He starts thinking about all these things, and he decides to take a handful of Quaaludes that he brings with him. He takes them. He quickly passes out, and
for Quaaludes, for those not familiar, it's like a narcotic. That's like an overdose, a handful.
Right, like exactly. It's purposeful. He is trying to end his life. And, days pass on the surface, and the family doesn't hear from their son, who's at school, very young, supposed to be under the protection of MSU.
Yeah.
And they call this private investigator, William C. Deere, to go and kind of do what police couldn't at the time, find their son,
Yeah.
He flies to
And
MSU.
you've talked to this man.
I've talked to Deere.
He's still alive. He's still...
He's still kicking, and he
doing
still
stuff.
has a business, a private detective,
Yeah.
a business of his own. Often calls himself, the real life James Bond. I should add. Yeah.
Real life James Bond.
Right.
So you spoke to the real life James Bond. He told you
did.
it's 1979. He's going to East Lansing.
Yeah. He's going to East Lansing. He's finding out everything he can. He finds out that he likes to go in the tunnels. Dallas likes the tunnels, and he requests MSU. Let me search him. Mm-hmm. He's got to be down there. I know he likes it. It's dangerous. That's his place to be. And at first, MSU says no. That in fact, the tunnels, they're not accessible. I think Deere told me that MSU told him that the tunnels didn't even exist. I'm not sure. You can take that at his word, but. Eventually, after a lot of tense conversations, MSU lets Deere search the tunnels for Dallas. So him, a few of his partners, and local police, they go on this 2-day journey.
Wow.
And they just search the whole thing, comb all of this network.
I mean, there are miles of these tunnels, right?
Yeah,
Under this giant campus.
I should say, currently there are 13 miles of tunnels under the campus. At the time, I think it was a little bit less because there are less buildings. But it's very hot. He has to take breaks because it's just like heat exhaustion. He describes in his book that he wrote about it, there's a little like metal clip on his overall that like during this time in the tunnels, it heats up to the point where it scorches through the shirt into his skin. It's a dangerous environment, right? Eventually, he finds the joint, the Quaaludes that Dallas left behind, but no
Dallas?
No Dallas.
Whoa.
And he keeps searching for him, tries all these kind of weird, wacky investigative methods. He doesn't find him until...
Doesn't he... Because this is another great detail of the story. He engages in a game of tunnels, Dungeons and Dragons, to kind of get in Dallas's head.
Not in the tunnels, on surface, but just to kind of understand the allure of the game.
He played just to kind of get in the kid's head. And tell us about trestling.
Yeah, trestling. So
another Dallas hobby, right?
Yeah. All these dangerous things. He used to go on train tracks. There's a train tracks. There's a trestle above the water, right? And this is actually something that some college students would do during this time. They would lay under the trestle and they would let a train pass by over their heads. So basically, like inches above their face.
Like in between the tracks, underneath the train.
Exactly. Yeah, you're underneath the train. And Dallas would do that. He's a very skinny, person. Mm-hmm. So he was able to. Deere tried to, again, get inside of his head. He just put it upon himself to, go to those same tracks and lay on them. He realized, though, as the train was moving towards him, it had this thing on it meant to deflect objects in its path, like, large rocks or anything like that.
Like a guy on the tracks.
Right. It would have killed him, basically, if he hadn't realized, looked up, and then he describes in the book at the last moment, I don't know how true that is, he jumps off
out of the
into
way.
the water,
Oh, wow.
Saving his life inches from
So
death.
he's deep in this investigation.
Yeah,
miles
he's
of
committed.
tunnels inside the kid's head. How does he end up actually finding out what happened to Dallas?
He gets a phone call from Dallas himself. Dallas has survived the overdose. He's crawled out of the tunnels, bounced around between a few East Lansing hosts, and eventually made his way to, I believe, Morgan City, Louisiana.
Really?
He's got like a kind of a part-time job there. He's just sort of escaping from everything, and
this investigator who's been spending all this time looking for him, he just calls him.
Yeah, he just calls him.
Yeah.
He's heard that he's looking for him. He gives it up, and he says, you can come and get me, and he does. Returns him to his parents. The media gets word of it. It's basically solved at that point.
Yeah.
It kind of does. That's not the ending though. Deere and Dallas, they have sort of a relationship afterwards, where just, providing comfort, kind of a fatherly figure. And he gets a series of kind of concerning phone calls from Dallas saying that the problems that he was talking about earlier, they've continued. They haven't
The bullying, struggling with his sexuality.
Yeah, the pressure from his parents especially. And 1 year and 1 day after he went missing from the tunnels, he fatally shot himself. And Deer told me that he had a phone call a little bit before, and he said, like, detective, like, things haven't improved, they haven't gotten better at all. And that was really the last he ever heard of him.
Wow.
So this case kind of, especially his untimely death, kind of caused an uproar within the Dungeons and Dragons community, because he was so associated with that game that people thought, anybody who played it would sort of be driven to suicide somehow. It even inspired a movie called Mazes and Monsters.
With Tom Hanks.
With Tom Hanks in his first leading role.
Wow.
Right? Where he plays this character that gets overly involved in a role-playing game and then eventually...
because I think it's interesting that, the way that you just told us about this Dallas story is not the way that it's told in so much... I mean, it was so much media and the movies and the books and the radio and all that, but it's like it's sensationalized in a way.
It is,
into all of this fear over, like, this Dungeons and Dragons becoming this satanic thing and how it motivated this kid to do all this weird stuff and go disappear into these tunnels. And it really became so much bigger than it truly was.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
Yeah. Well, beyond just Dallas, because that's obviously a very high-profile example. Mm-hmm. You talk to a lot of people who've also been down in these tunnels, spent time down there. Tell me about other MSU students who have, made a hobby out of just hanging out in the tunnels.
Yeah, so I should note that they were first built in 1904, mm-hmm. Just as a new way of providing heat to the university. But by the 1960s, that's when the first, reported case of somebody going into the tunnels for fun. And I talked to, one of the people at the time that did that, and his name's Will. He told me that, at the time he had a friend in the dorms that, was trying to make a map of the tunnels, and occasionally that he would, lead him down into the tunnels with him and just show him around. He said it smelled a little bit weird. And later, and that's the thing, this is what happens to really a lot of the people that I talk to that have been in the tunnels. It sticks with them, and afterwards they become inspired and they make media about it. I mean, this individual, he wrote a book and he included the MSU steam tunnels as a location in it. It's a novel, but it was just on his mind even 60 years later. But that's not the only person that have been in them. I mean, there were, in 2015, 5 students were arrested for going in the tunnels.
Wow. I mean, we found all those social media posts, people talking about it on Reddit and stuff. Like,
online, everybody says, I
went down there through this entrance, this is how you get in, how you get out. Like,
exactly.
So what is, this widespread fascination, all these people finding and being fascinated by the same thing, just hanging out down in those tunnels? You in your story, you talk to people who try and get to the bottom of, like, why do we like this? Why are so many people into this? Can you talk me through what's the appeal? What's the draw?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's similar to what I was experiencing when I see, the world lit up from below in those steam tunnel grates. It's just this intrigue. I talked to an expert, I guess, on the underground. He wrote a book about underground spaces, hidden spaces. It's really great. His name's Will Hunt. The book is called Underground, I believe. Oh. Yeah, makes sense. And he tells me that, throughout all of society, you have these tales of people going into these deep, dark places and re-emerging kind of transformed. Yeah. And there's something alluring about it. It's basically, people are able to project their known feelings onto the unknown. If there's something you fear in society, you project it onto what you don't know. And that's the case, from what we've seen with these tunnels. People have said that there are people... criminals, in the tunnels.
Well, actually, it's another odd thing in the story. This private detective, William C. Deer, he says while he's observing these tunnels that he develops his theory that they're connected to some sort of string of elaborate sexual assaults. Right.
He's convinced that there are basically, like rapists in the tunnels that pop out and assault people. And he claims that he saw a tunnel vent move once, and he's convinced that it wasn't one of the student explorers that he was so closely studying, but it was actually one of these perpetrators of these crimes. And we see sort of a similar thing. It's not just criminal level, but it's also kind of conspiracy. I talked to someone who said they saw 8 men in suits, in business suits, one by one crawl out of an entrance right outside the administration building. And she was really, I mean, this was first reported actually by the State News in 2003. I talked to her 20 years later, and she stands by the statement.
Really?
Yeah. She's now works at a university herself, and she says, it was kind of a really strange experience. She was scared, and she couldn't help but wonder. I mean, what's down there?
Like business suits, like
Business
guys in
suits. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Like businessmen.
I wonder what they were doing out there.
Yeah, she thinks that there's some sort of nuclear bunker, a contingency of some sort under the university, especially by the admin building, is what kind of prompted that fear. I wasn't able to confirm that. The spokesperson Emily Grant said that she wasn't aware of anything down there, part of any emergency plan. But yeah. There's something that really draws people to those spaces. And I talked to somebody else. He's a filmmaker, a local indie horror filmmaker, who kind of uses that to his advantage. He says that there's, something that's just perfect for horror movies about underground. And he's actually filmed...
Creepy, the idea of these tunnels.
He's filmed 2 movies in the MSU steam tunnels. The Infrastructure Planning and Facilities team, IPF, they let him down there. And he filmed 2 kind of elaborate, one, there's a monster that lives in the tunnels under this fictional university that, occasionally grabs students and eats them. It's cannibal. And another one, students, they're involved in this larger plot, and they hide another student's body in the tunnels when a party goes wrong. And just all of these things. It's this perfect dark, dim setting for tragic events.
Yeah. It is. It's scary, but and that's kind of like the same thing with the Dallas case, is that people project all of these cultural perceptions of, there's Satanism and the kids are playing the Dungeons and Dragons and they're leaving our religion behind and all that. Sort of, I guess, in the 80s with Dallas got projected onto the MSU tunnels. And you explore that in a really great way in your article. And then sort of the pushback from sort of the Dungeons and Dragons community trying to defend themselves, and it's handled well in the story. And you were so fascinated by these tunnels that not only have you, put together this accounting of the tunnels underneath MSU, but you went beyond MSU. And you found that there are other universities that also have similar networks of underground steam tunnels, and you talked to some of those explorers. Tell us a little bit about the tale of the tunnel bobs.
Yeah. So it's a very common system for these large universities to have. And coincidentally, this is so common for people to explore these things that 2 universities have these similar figures. They're both named Tunnel Bob. So at University of Michigan, there was somebody in the 70s who never gave his real name to the press. I did talk to him. Didn't give me, permission to publish his real name either. But his name, he's known by Tunnel Bob because a security guard would see him all the time and just sort of gave him that nickname, and it stuck. And everybody at U of M knows him by Tunnel Bob, and he's just this infamous figure that, he would explore the tunnels. He told me that he was in the tunnels one day. He found access to this room full of these jars that had fetuses in them, floating in this sort of formaldehyde, glowing UV light, all of this spooky stuff. It was in the basement of the biomedical building, apparently. And the tunnels just led there, and it's funny because coincidentally, in what was it? University of Wisconsin, Madison. There's another individual named Tunnel Bob.
Another Tunnel Bob.
Yeah,
These are related figures, or
no? So they don't know each other at all. I asked U of M's Tunnel Bob if they've ever spoken. He said no.
They know of each other?
They do know of each other. Yeah. He's familiar with the other Tunnel Bob. But this Tunnel Bob, he's same sort of thing. People thought that he lived in the tunnels. He's since denied that in an interview. People say that he lived down there because he's scared of women. He's a Vietnam vet. He's shell shocked. And those things generally aren't true. He's just really likes the tunnels.
Like all these other folks.
Yeah.
Theo, this, again, to those of you listening, you got to read this story. It's amazing. You have spent so much time being so thorough, chasing down all of these leads about this system of steam tunnels. I got to ask you, for the listeners of the 1909, this is still a news podcast. I got to ask hard-hitting questions. Have you been down in the tunnels?
Alex, no.
Okay. Really?
Yeah.
Right.
Have I been tempted? No. Not even a
You're not at all tempted? Maybe to celebrate the publication of your big story? A little time in the tunnels?
Well, once it's published, you know they're going to be locking it up.
They're,
Right?
yeah, you're ruining it for everybody.
They're going to be
All
installing
right.
those motion sensors.
Well, Theo, thank you so much for coming on the show, delighting us with this wonderful tale. It's always a joy to have you on. You're on a lot. And as I've said before, we don't pay you for it because you're not the
Right.
host, but you're on pretty much every episode. So, yeah, he's here out of the good of his heart, folks. All right, Theo, thank you so much. Great to talk to you as always.
Thank you, Alex. Have a good one.
All right. Well, Demonte, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Alex. Great to be on.
Yeah, so you've been doing, a lot of great reporting. You're our new student affairs reporter, writing about, ASMSU, which is the undergraduate student government, student clubs, student organizations, and these coalitions. And this week you've written a story about sort of a major shakeup to the major kind of coalitions for student groups. And before we get into that, though, I want you to just explain, because there's so many acronyms and jargon and words that just get thrown around. The Corps and Cops Coalition. We talk about it a lot. We don't always explain what it is. Tell us, for those who might not know, what is Corps and Cops? What does it do?
So, Corps and Cops Coalition, acronym of itself, is the Coalition of Racial and Ethnic Students and the Council of Progressive Students. The organization has been around since 2013. Has done a lot of great work in advocating for students of colors and other marginalized communities on Michigan State University's campus, including advocating for the Multicultural Center, which is in construction as we speak.
So that center, the board passed, a massive budget for it. Last year, that was the product of sort of this kind of advocacy by this coalition?
Right, yes.
I see. And so it's Corps is Racial and Ethnic Students, Council of, or COPS is Council of Progressive Students.
Right.
I see. But things are changing, and you wrote about it this week. Tell us what happened. How did the whole thing blow up?
So what basically happened was on January 27th, Black Student Alliance, aka BSA, released a statement via social media informing its community that the student organization will be withdrawing from the Corps and Cops Coalition due to lack of transparency. Well, I don't want to say lack of transparency, but a lack of communication, unauthorized allocation of funds, and a whole bunch of other stuff that has been at hand.
So
for
BSA, was one of the members of this coalition. I know that, the university provides some funds to this coalition to do kind of events and some of the advocacy work and stuff. You're saying that, they were doing that without spending that money, without communicating without getting authorization from BSA, one of the members?
According to the statement, yes.
I see.
A week later, you see APASO and CREW, which is the Asian Pacific American Student Organization, and Culturas de las Razas.
The Latinx student organization,
The
right?
Latinx Student Organization both announced on the same day that they too will be withdrawing from the Corps and Cops Coalition. I think that the APASO student group went into full debt of one of the many factors that led to the withdrawal of all three of these organizations.
And the reasons were similar, was communication, using funds without permission from the members?
So each of the statement is very similar to BSA's statement. Mentions lack of communication, unauthorized allocation of funds without per se the student organization's consent or knowledge. But I believe APASO's statement goes into full detail. It reads basically, since the organization was founded in 2013, higher administration have took approximately $5,000 from each student group without their, again, consent nor full knowledge, I should say.
I see. So they feel like, the administration is taking this money from these student groups for these coalitions and that they're not getting much for it. Is that fair to say?
I'm not sure if that would be fair to say, but I would say it is a factor, one of the many factors at hand of...
Is sort of that, the $5,000 that's drawn from each group.
Right.
I see. So what about, the other thing I thought was interesting about the statements is that, Corps and Cops obviously work together, they're described together a lot, but they are sort of separate, and they, the statements were pretty clear in differentiating that they felt a little bit differently about Corps than they did about Cops. Can you talk about that, the difference between these two coalitions?
Yeah, so Corps itself has been around for a few years now, longer than the Corps and Cops coalition has. To my understanding, Corps and Cops has been around for 10 years now, since 2023. But Corps itself basically serves more of a space for students of colors and marginalized students on campus, and has been since its founding. And each of the statement reiterates that even though that they are leaving the Chorus and Cops Coalition, they are completely
sort of open. I mean, it sort of felt like, they're leaving Chorus and Cops, but they're keeping the door open for Chorus. Is that fair to say?
I would say for certain that it looks like that they're still open to working with cops if they need any help. They're a phone call away and whatnot, but they're just kind of moving aside from
withdrawing kind of formally from the coalition, it feels like,
Right.
And so, but where does that leave Cops? Because, Cops it's 4 groups, right? It's CREW, it's BSA, it's APASO, and it's NASO, which is a Native American student organization. I mean, what is it? Do we know what the future of Cops looks like when 3 out of the 4 members have withdrawn? I mean, can you be a coalition with one group?
As of this episode, North American Indigenous Student Organization, or NASO, they are still currently in connections with the Chorus and Cops Coalition, but it's currently unclear of where that leaves the coalition as a whole, with a mass majority of its coalition itself withdrawn.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, thank you for taking the time to cover this. This is obviously a very complicated story, and I know that you're going to stick with it. And so we might have you on once we have a little bit more clarity on what this all means for sort of the future of Chorus and Cops. But thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Nice to be on.
That's all for now, but we'll be back next week with fresh reporting from the great minds here at the State News. Until then, the stories we discussed and plenty more are available at statenews.com. Thank you to my guests, Demonte and Theo, our podcast editor, Anthony Brinson, and video producer, Brad LaPlante. And most of all, thank you for listening. For the 1909, I'm Alex Walters.